Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's pretty late for some of us already, so I really appreciate it that all of us are here today. Let me give a brief introduction of our speakers first. First things first, TERRI. TERRI is the Executive Director for the Centre for Legal Innovation, Australia, New Zealand and APAC at the College of Law. And SERENA is the Director of Bizibody Technology and Litigation Edge, and June is the founder of EasyLaw. So these three incredible women here are going to share with us their insights, their experience on legal technology as well as legal innovation, and their impact on APAC's legal space. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Let's kickstart with our first little question, shall we? First and foremost, could any of you just share with us what your definition of legal technology and legal innovation is?
TERRI.
Hey, TERRI.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me. Hello, everyone. Okay, legal tech. I take a pretty broad definition of that. So to me, it's technology, it's software, it's basically that technology and software, if we're talking about legal tech, that's used to provide legal services and products. So, I would sweep into that probably also AI, maybe even blockchain in its broadest kind of definition. So quite a lot. And innovation for me, I kind of like what's become a little bit of a classic definition of that, change that adds value. But I would add on to that value for clients and for employees in the organisation. So the value chain is broader than any one kind of group. So pretty broad definitions for me, but I think probably industry-wise, we're probably still in a fairly broad definition of those things at the moment. How's that to start? Good start?
That's a good start.
Yeah.
That's a very broad start. That's excellent. So, Serena, is yours as broad?
Well, I started in 2000 and I was trying to convince people that there was such a thing as legal tech, but no one was moved by that. So, I've always thought, okay, what is legal tech, right? Because it's Office 365 legal tech, right? AI. So from my viewpoint, I see it as technology that is specifically designed so that the purpose is important to facilitate the provision of legal services and or consumer access to legal services. So, the design part is actually pretty important because although lawyers use Office 365 all the time, that is not legal tech to me, right? And legal innovation is, I define it as new ways of delivering legal services, which results in better, cheaper, and faster client experiences.
A very UI, UX centric kind of a definition. And we're going to go to June to ask her because her definition is going to come from a non-legal kind of perspective.
And you know what? Serena and TERRI both summarized all the points that I wanted to say. So I think basically it all comes to efficiency. And a lot of people, when they talk about legal tech, maybe some of them, they're very customer centric. And then from my side, I actually thinking that sometimes legal tech, it doesn't have to be huge. It can be depending on the market that we are serving. Like, for example, in Malaysia, we still have a lot of lawyers or law firms. They don't even use the very simple kind of technology. It can be like, Dropbox or something like that. So to me, anything that can fit into, whether it can be software, it can be hardware, that can fit into deliver the service in a very efficient manner, helping the lawyers or helping the consumer to get access to legal, just like what Serena pointed, I think is legal tech.
Pretty good understanding of what you think legal technology is. And my next question is, I really like to find out, as Serena pointed out, when she got talking about legal tech, nobody knew what it is. So my question is, when and how did you actually first get introduced to legal tech and legal innovation?
Right. So so I was a lawyer for about 11 years. And then really, I was just tired and listless and looking for new adventures. So I looked far and wide and, I then started a .com with 3 other lawyers who were feeling the same thing. And that was called Bizibody Technology, which was short for Business Information Body, right? So nothing really to do with legal. In fact, whilst legal was one of the things we wanted to target, we couldn't because of, the strict rules against fee sharing, right? So pay a commission to a website, for a referral, it's not doable. But we started in 2000, just at the tail end of the .com. So for better or worse, okay, we hadn't spent all our money and we could pivot. So my pivot was to something that I knew well, which was legal. So although it did not have a name, I then looked around. Nothing in Singapore. No one's using tech beyond, QuickBooks and Word. And I looked at Australia, and there was legal tech. There was practice management systems designed specifically for lawyers. So it was my pivot of desperation to actually look for an area that I already knew. And okay, by that time I had been baptized into the whole tech thing. I knew that, the jargon at least. I then saw, okay, that's a good point of intersection, right? I didn't realize how good it would be until much later on. But that was, how I, it wasn't like there was such a thing and, I could say, right, I want to be a legal technologist. I would call myself that, but, it would just be question mark. No one, the technologists didn't think that there was such a thing.
Legal tech was more advanced at where TERRI was at when you first started off. So
Yeah,
TERRI,
for sure.
how did you get introduced to legal tech then?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm going to sound like I'm 100 years old, and possibly I am. For me, it was honestly, it was in the 80s when I would say your personal desktop started to come onto your desk. They were about as big as a box, and they looked very similar to that as well. And we were, just starting to use them. And it was, at the time, it was an absolute fascination with, wow, I just can't believe what this large box can do. And then I was living in Hong Kong at the time, and you folks might remember this, but I got my first Motorola flip phone. Do you remember those? They're retro now, right?
Yep.
Okay. And I thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. So it was an excitement around the opportunities, and those opportunities I think have just grown and refined over time. And I think for me, the innovation piece of it came in the 90s. Actually, I went off and became a full-time student and did an MBA, and it really opened my eyes to go to kind of a point that I think June and Serena were making about, how clients view things versus how lawyers view things. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that there really needed to be a pretty significant transformation of the legal industry. And I thought that and my excitement around technology could somehow combine, and, something could be done with that. And so it was a slow and then a fast burn in a way. And I think it got faster because the technology, frankly, just became so much more accessible. And, we didn't have the big boxes on the desks. I'm speaking to you now from a teeny little laptop, and I just got more and more excited every time things kept changing. So it's a fascination, and I'm truly like a kid in a candy shop. To this day, I think what we're doing right now is unbelievable, just incredible.
Agree with you, TERRI. And you also spoke about the huge changes within the industry that kind of kickstart the usage of technology, right? So speaking of the latest change, there will be COVID-19. The pandemic hit all of us, and that kind of kickstarted quite a number of tech adoption in the legal industry and legal innovation as well. So all three of you are from different jurisdictions, and I'd just like to know what legal tech adoption and legal innovation was like in your respective jurisdiction when the COVID-19 pandemic hit.
For Malaysia, I think because prior to the COVID-19 or the pandemic hit, we were actually promoting a practice management software among the lawyers. So what I noticed is that before the pandemic hit, a lot of lawyers from a lot of law firms, they'll be like, yeah, you know what, it's not a necessity for me. It is something that you can have, and I can still stick with my Excel, or I can still stick with my, accountant, outsource it, like still doing data entry. They are fine with it. But then when the pandemic hit, we see a surge where they started to panic. They were like, oh, this is real. Like, that is not going to be like 2 weeks time. It's not going to be like 1 month time. They keep waiting. And then in the end, I realized that the pandemic actually changed how lawyers view technology, at least in Malaysia. They used to take a standpoint where, you know what, I'm going to figure that out when I'm really free, when I don't have any cases to actually work on it. But I think they're too busy working in the cases rather than on their business. That is why they are missing a big part of this legal technology back then. So when the pandemic hit, it's kind of like, you know what, they are forced to adopt. I'm really surprised. Like some of the law firms and lawyers, they are really quick at adopting, and not only talking about legal tech, and also in terms of the marketing point of view, they start doing more content than ever. We never really seen that kind of like, trend back then before the pandemic. So this is what I seen in Malaysia.
Would you say that it's the same thing in Singapore as well? It's like a knee-jerk reaction to the pandemic, Serena?
Well, I think, in many ways, Singapore has always been kind of a hit because our government makes us a hit, right? So you got your e-lit, you got your ACRA, you got your e-lodgement for property. So very early on, I already okay, we were helped by that, and also hindered by it because it also meant more siloed information. So, whatever used to be in the practice management system now also had to be keyed somewhere else into a government database, right? So, we've always had this tension, and in a way, lawyers here are like, it's a bit different. It's more like legal tech again or technology again. We hardly got to version 1 and now we've got to do something else. So there's a little bit of a muchness sometimes that they feel. So I think when COVID came, it really brought home the fact that actually a lot of the firms were actually quite able to function quite remotely. Because they were actually either already had VPN or cloud. So I had brought in Clio, and there were some others. So actually they were quite well. So even the large firms, and I found large firms were actually particularly well placed to do it, because I realized that okay, if you're an international firm, you can't be sending paper across borders. So it wasn't too bad, but the changes that were great was Zoom e-hearings, right? Office 365 take-up was amazing. The people that really suffered were the conveyancers. Why? Because e-signatures was still not allowed for certain types of documents, wills, transfer property, and also checks. Here there is still so much checks. So a lot of payments, and as suppliers to lawyers, we know this, all our bills got paid later. Okay, so there were certain pain points, there still are today, but actually it wasn't too bad. With e-hearings, it was amazing how you're right, they actually did adapt very quickly. The courts, the lawyers, makeshift, use a webcam, as if it was like, meant to be for a very, like they were using webcams as, sort of to take up one webcam, and they would place it very far from the lawyer so that it could take the whole room. Like webcams are not meant to be used that way. But it was make do, it was makeshift. But actually, when push came to shove, we could do it. And I think that realization, and then of course work from home, and that's changed completely how people view work. Work is not a place. Work is anywhere. So it's certainly, I think it is going to be, when we look at it retrospectively, it is going to be a pivotal moment, that this was where, great, for all its awful things, there were some really good things about COVID for legal tech.
So for TERRI, you dabble not just in private practice, you also have insights into legal education, you have insights into sandboxes and all that. So how does this pandemic hit kind of give rise to better adoption, if any, or better legal innovation?
I was listening to what Serena was saying, and she could have been describing the situation in Australia as well. There were a lot of pieces, but they weren't necessarily connected, nor were people necessarily using them. And I think the pandemic kind of forced people to use technology initially for issues around business continuity, frankly, whatever the business was, whether it was a law firm or a company or it was the courts. Business had to go on, so we had to find a way to do that, and we couldn't do it in person. So it kind of led to an adoption of technology that's now kind of transformed into business as usual. And I think what it's done is it's laid a foundation that now allows us to layer on top of it. So, and definitely the big winner was Office 365, definitely, and Zoom. I think probably did quite well out of it as well. But yeah, I think that's really what it's done. It's forced us to create a different foundation, get everybody pretty skilled in that foundation, and allowed us the opportunity to build much faster now on top of that foundation. I don't think, in all honesty, we would have seen the rapidity of change or the depth and breadth of it had we not been forced to do it. So it was all there, but people just weren't using what was available.
Also, the same thing, June, that in Malaysia, things are just there, but people are just not using whatever is available and they just scramble.
Yeah, until pandemic, that is what I observe. when people are being placed in a situation where they are being forced to adapt, that's where they will make changes in terms of the shifting of the mindset, because we are all too free at home back then, that the only thing that, if let's say you can't really meet your clients, the only thing is to work on your business and to really think about the structure, the technology, anything in the operations side that can further improve. So definitely I agree with that.
The part that I would like to get into more is, what allowed for that kind of growth, because tools are out there, but awareness might not be there. So for Australia, they've ventured into legal tech and legal innovation earlier than most jurisdictions in APAC, right? Terry, what do you think is the key factor that allowed for that kind of a growth? It's quite exponential as opposed to the rest of APAC.
It's, Adeline, it's probably a combination of factors. One of them is certainly that we're really a small market that's highly competitive. And so that drives a lot of things. And certainly tech is no different from many others. I think we've also been very fortunate to have a number of visionaries, and those folks have, they might come out of the courts, might come out of the judiciary, or they have come out of private practice, or they've come out of in-house legal departments, or they've set up, what used to be alternative legal service providers. They're mainstream now, so it's hard to call them alternative, right? But we've had those kind of visionaries. And I think, some of the legal tech startups have had really great success overseas. And I'm thinking here of folks like Mediation, who are working in online dispute resolution, Checkbox and Joseph, who are kind of working in automation and no-code platforms, and folks like LawPath that really kind of, paved the way. And then I think we've got a number of places where people can come together. And by places, I don't mean physically, although that's true, but, also virtually. So there's organisations, for example, like ALTA, and I know we're going to talk about them, Australian Legal Technology Association, but there's also been law firms like Lander and Rogers that have set up law tech hubs that have become, really a place where legal technology can grow with support. So I think if you put all of those things together and put them in a glass and shook them up, it's a combination of those factors, I think, that has helped.
So that glass is, in the Singapore context, is provided by the government. So Serena, you've touched on it earlier. So Singapore has just consistently promoted legal innovation and the adoption of technology for the legal practice, right? Specifically through a lot of efforts, your grants like your Taxcelerate for Law and so on and so forth. So Serena, what have you observed in terms of legal tech uptake since these incentives were introduced?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we're the only jurisdiction, I think, where the government throws money at you to incentivize you to actually invest in legal tech.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I'm officially jealous.
Yeah, too.
It's good and bad because but it is how Singapore is, right? Because it's very okay, right? The government knows better, and we think you really ought to do this, so we'll put our money where what we're into what we're saying. But it now is become a grant culture, right? So when you got grants, it's like, okay, right, it just sales hits the roof. And when there's no grant, no one wants to buy anything. They're just waiting for the next grant. I'm like, how can we run a business like this dependent on grant? But you know what? We had 2 grants already. just for legal, and there's going to be one more that's coming up soon. I'm like, okay, so I can't actually really say, don't think that there's going to be another grant because there's now, So I'm like, okay, it's good, but I'll tell you what happens is this then is the government that decides what goes into a practice management system, and they will need to say, right, we'll only approve because it's pre-approved solutions. So, they'll pre-approve those that are tried and tested. So where's your innovation, right? So it works, I think, to get people to a baseline. And I think it works very well because it's like, the motivation may be wrong. It's like, oh, I don't want to miss out on the grant. I don't really know what legal tech is about, but I don't want to miss out on the grant, right? So even though they sometimes sign up, but because they don't really have that commitment or really, it's just, I don't want to miss out on this, then it doesn't work as well as it should. So I'm in two minds about this now that, we have actually done quite a lot of the baseline people, and we really need to now advance further. I feel that, this may not be the best strategy to get into more specialized stuff as opposed to broad baseline practice management and document management systems.